Imagine you work at a zoo in Australia. Your job is to feed the animals every single morning, but you notice the elephants are missing bananas, the lions are missing meat scraps, the monkeys are missing fruit. A giant Galapagos turtle is missing its head. Who would steal the head of a tortoise? The thief's name is Malcolm Naden. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand how Naden became Australia's most wanted ghost, you gotta know where he came from. Malcolm John Naden was born on November 5th, 1973 in Dubbo. Dubbo is a regional town in New South Wales. Think dusty outback vibes. It's about 250 miles northwest of Sydney. Naden grew up in a working class family with Indigenous heritage on his dad's side, and from what reports say, his childhood wasn't all sunshine. He dropped out of school early, bounced around odd jobs, but found his niche as an abattoir worker. Abattoir is a fancy word for the guy that kills animals in a slaughterhouse. This means he got real comfortable with knives, blood, and breaking down animals. That skill set came in handy later, in the worst ways imaginable. By his early 30s, Naden was living a quiet life in Dubbo. He was single, had no kids, and was crashing with relatives. Neighbors described him as a loner, a bit eccentric, with a fascination for the bush. No, not like other dudes' fascination with the bush. I'm talking about the Australian outback. He was a crack shot with a rifle, knew how to track game, and could disappear into the wilderness for days. Sounds like an innocent survivalist hobby, right? Kinda. He put those skills to work doing some pretty gnarly stuff later on. Let me stop right there for a second. Naden was the kill guy at a slaughterhouse, was single, no children, described as a loner, couch surfed, and his favorite hobby was chilling in the jungle for days on end, and that didn't raise any red flags with anyone. Okay, I'll continue. Naden's little crime spree kicks off in May of 2004 when he was linked to the aggravated indecent assault of a 15-year-old girl. Reports say she was a family friend or relative, and the attack happened there in Dubbo. Police start sniffing around and he initially slips away. Things escalate fast though. In January 2005, his 24-year-old cousin, Letitia Nolan, a mom of 4 young kids, vanishes without a trace. She's last seen at Naden's grandparents' house where he was staying. Police connect the dots and Naden becomes the prime suspect. Her car is found abandoned but no body. Letitia's family is left in limbo. They have no idea where she's gone and are raising her 4 kids without answers. But Naden's not done. No sirree. Just 6 months later, in June 2005, another cousin, 24-year-old Christy Scholes, is found strangled in Naden's locked bedroom at the same grandparents' home he was staying in before. She's got ligature marks around her neck, which are signs of a brutal struggle. After Naden had killed Christy, he defiled the body. Christy was a vibrant young woman, full of life, and her death rocks the town of Dubbo. Police raid the house, but Naden's already ghosted by fleeing into the bush with whatever he could carry. In August 2005, the manhunt officially begins. Naden is now wanted for 2 murders, the raping of the 15-year-old, and whatever else they can pin on him. I wanted to talk about this story because of how insane it's about to get. He doesn't flee to another country. He doesn't catch a boat or a plane over to New Zealand. He goes feral in the rugged Australian bush around Dubbo. It's all just dense forests, mountains, rivers, snakes, everything that can kill you. From 2005 to 2012, 7 straight years, he survives like a one-man post-apocalyptic movie. Police throw everything they have at him. Hundreds of officers, tracking dogs, helicopters with thermal imaging, infrared, the works. Rewards hit $250,000 and the tips flood in, but he's always one step ahead. His first run-in with the law was a couple months after he killed his cousin in 2005. Cops raid the grandparents' house where that murder took place, and they find him hiding in the ceiling cavity like the sneaky little rat that he is. And like a sneaky little rat, Naden smashes out a window, scales a fence, and disappears. From there, his survival game goes nuts. He breaks into remote farmhouses, cabins, and sheds. He steals food, clothes, ammo, even Christmas decorations one time for some reason. Hey, I guess even bad guys love Christmas. He'd sometimes leave the places tidy, like a polite burglar. Other times he'd trash them. He hunted kangaroos with stolen knives or rifles, butchered them perfectly, and ate them raw or cooked over hidden fires. He even used their skins for blankets and wasted nothing. One of the craziest chapters happened in late 2005 into early 2006. This is when he hides inside the Western Plains Zoo in Dubbo. Yeah, the actual open-range zoo with lions, elephants, giraffes, the whole deal. He sneaks in and basically moves into the animal enclosure at night. He's stealing bananas straight from the elephant feed. He's raiding monkeys for fruit. He's scavenging meat scraps from the carnivores and digging through rubbish bins for leftovers. The zoo keeps telling the police that the bananas are missing. The police think, wait a minute, there's a psycho in the woods somewhere. Could be him taking the fruit. On December 23, 2005, they shut sections of the zoo down and run a massive search with helicopters and dozens of officers sweeping every square foot of the property. They couldn't find Naden, so they figure the best next thing is to cut off his food supply, so they start locking up all the animal food. This pisses off Naden and he becomes desperate. According to the 2017 book The Contractor, which was written by a private investigator who worked the case, Naden decided to send a message. A vet at the zoo later recalled seeing a figure fleeing the Galapagos tortoise enclosure. When the vet checked, they found one of those massive, ancient, 440-pound tortoises with its head ripped clean off. Yeah, Naden got hungry. He had torn the endangered tortoise's head off and sucked out the raw guts and organs. He was annoyed the food was gone, so he turned the zoo animals into his personal pantry. That's not survival, that's straight up feral horror. Old boy had become a cryptid, like El Chupacabra who sucks goats. Naden would be Chupador de Tortugas. I think that's how you would say that. Anyways, come to find out, police couldn't find him because he was hiding in the attic of the zoo manager's hut. Slippery little rat. Dude was on the property the whole time police were looking for him. He flees the zoo, and in early 2006, turtle sucker sightings start trickling in an area called Lightning Ridge. This place is about 200 miles from the zoo, so our boy has been doing some serious hiking. And yes, I have decided he is a cryptid named Turtle Sucker. Now please argue in the comments about how turtles and tortoises are different and how clear it is that I was raised in the public education system of rural Alabama. Anyway, some more people see Turtle Sucker at a place called Willow Bend Village Aboriginal Mission. This place is about 400 miles from the last sighting, so again, our boy is doing some serious hiking. Police launch another search with dozens of cops, dogs, and helicopters. He slips away again. His relatives go on TV at this point, pleading into the cameras, "Malcolm, come home, it's over." He doesn't listen to this at all. He keeps walking. He's drifting north and east, mostly living off whatever the Australian bush and random home break-ins can give him. Dude is just a ghost for all of 2006, killing kangaroos for food and stealing people's stuff. The police are getting really tired of this guy, so they put out an initial bounty of $50,000, which was later raised to $250,000. 3 frickin' years go by without any major incidents. The turtle sucker is out there somewhere though. Reports don't state what kind of intel it was, but some intel puts him near a town called Kempsey. It was probably turtle-sucking intel. Doing research and checking out Kempsey, I gotta say it looks like a prime place to steal people's stuff. If I was a murdering turtle sucker, that's definitely where I'd set up camp. He chills around there for a year, then in 2010 he bounces around all over the place. From looking at a map of all the ground he's covered, I'm pretty sure he didn't spend one night in the same place the entire time he was on the run. Police are kind of able to keep track of him after lifting fingerprints from his break-ins, but the dude just keeps slipping away. Another year goes by. It's 2011 now. Police think they might have him, so they lock on to a remote campsite near a mountainous area called Barrington Tops. Tactical teams move in, trying to box him in without spooking him. Naden, being the paranoid survival expert that he is, spots them first through the scope of a stolen rifle. He doesn't run this time though. He waits to ambush the cops. The tactical officers are getting closer to Naden. He raises the stolen .22 caliber rifle and aims it at the first enemy he sees, the police tracking dog leading the officers to him. At the last second, the dog walks out of sight, so he shifts his aim and fires at Senior Constable Brad McFadden. The bullet tears into McFadden's shoulder from under 10 meters. The officer drops to the ground, wounded but still breathing. Officers dive for cover, return fire, and call for an airlift for their wounded. In the chaos, Naden melts back into the bush before they can nab him. Officer McFadden goes into surgery and thankfully survives. The next day, Naden is sucking turtles near the shooting site. He hears the sound of a helicopter first, then the faint sound of Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son. The last thing he remembers is being engulfed in flames as an airstrike destroys his location and the surrounding area in the dense jungle. The trees were talking and they said they were hungry for napalm. At least I wish that happened. Would have been kind of cool. The reward stays at $250,000, but the urgency to catch this scumbag skyrockets. It's not just hide and go seek the turtle sucker anymore, it's oh crap, he's actively trying to kill us. Homie manages to evade police from December 2011 to March 2012. The manhunt entered its most intense phase around this time. The Australian public was hooked on the story, equal parts terrified and in some corners weirdly impressed. It started getting to the point where some people were looking at him as a folk hero like Ned Kelly. You guys ever hear about Ned Kelly? We'll go down the donut hole real quick. Ned Kelly was also an Australian criminal who liked to hide in the bush, but he did it around the 1870s. Kelly used to rob banks with homemade armor made of iron. Seriously, he looked like a walking moonshine still. Similar to Naden, he liked to shoot at police and he killed a couple of them. I don't want to get too much into Ned Kelly right now. We'll talk about him in a later episode of Crime is Fun. You know, that podcast that you should like to and subscribe to and turn on notifications to. And tell your friends about, even grandma, unless you sold her to the US Army for IED testing. Check out episode 1 of Crime is Fun, People Soup. For the next few months, December 2011 into March 2012, he sticks to the Gloucester area. Australians are gripped by the crazy man in the woods story so much, one pub owner said Naden had put Gloucester on the map and that beer sales had increased by 20% due to all the police officers in the area and tourist interest in the case. He's just back to his silly old ways though, more break-ins, more stolen ammo and guns, and sightings all over the place. He's cornered himself in denser bush, but he's still free. Until the night of March 22nd, 2012 that is. A tip leads 20 tactical officers and their dog squad to a rundown cabin about 18 miles west of Gloucester. Around midnight, they surround it before Naden can see them coming. He looks out the window of the rundown cabin and says, "Uh-oh." In classic turtle sucker fashion, he bolts out of the back of the cabin, trying to melt back into the dense bush. The cops weren't about to let him get away though. They had a trick up their sleeve that I like to call the bork bork nom nom. A canine handler lets go of his lead that was holding a German shepherd known as Chuck. Chuck goes flying out of the shadows and Chuck is very, very hungry. He latches onto Naden's leg and pins him to the ground. The other officers jump on him and quickly get him cuffed. After 7 years, they finally got him. Naden, looking like a skinny caveman, looks up at the police and mutters, "Thank God it's over, I've had enough." After 7 years of bush survival, turtle sucking, the millions of dollars poured into manhunts, the shootout, and that final takedown by Chuck the Canine, Malcolm Naden finally faced the music in Sydney's Supreme Court in 2013. The trial started exactly 1 year after his arrest on March 22, 2013. Naden, looking like a far cry from the bearded bushman arrested in photos, shuffled into the court in prison greens. He was skinnier, shaved head, trimmed beard, and fidgeting like a guy who'd rather be anywhere else. The court had already dealt with a quick fitness to stand trial issue back in February. Psychiatrists checked him out because of concerns about his mental state after years in isolation and being in the bush. By March, his attorney told the judge there was an issue, but there isn't one now. I'm not sure what that means, but Naden was declared fit, so there couldn't be any insanity defense or drawn-out hearings. On March 22nd, he stood in front of a courtroom and pleaded guilty to 32 charges. The big ones were the murders of Christy Scholes, who he strangled in June 2005, and his cousin Letitia Nolan, who he killed in January 2005, dismembered and dumped in a river. There was the aggravated indecent assault on the 15-year-old girl from 2004, shooting with intent to murder the police officer that was hunting him, and a long list of break-ins, thefts, and firearm offenses from his evasion years. Guilty across the board, no contest. The families in the public gallery, Letitia's relatives and Christy's loved ones, finally got the admission they'd waited 8 years for. Sentencing didn't drag on either. Prosecutors pushed hard for life, calling the crimes extraordinarily cruel and brutal. They painted Naden as a remorseless psychopath who'd shown zero regret. Hell, he even told the psychiatrist the murders were his highest achievement. The defense tried to argue severe depression as an excuse for all his snarly stuff he had done, but the judge was not buying it. Sentencing day finally came on June 14, 2013 in front of Judge Derek Price. The courtroom was packed with victims' families and supporters. Judge Price spent a full hour laying it out with no punches pulled. He described the killings as cold-blooded, merciless, and brutal. He rejected any real mental health excuse and hammered home the terror that Naden inflicted. For Christy Scoll's murder, the more horrific one with post-mortem defilement, Price handed down life imprisonment with no chance of parole. For Letitia Nolan, a minimum 21-year non-parole period. The rest of the stuff, like shooting at police, assaults, and thefts, he went ahead and added 40 years on top. Naden was there twitching, playing with his beard, drumming his fingers on the bench, even brushing dust off the rail like he was bored or detached. There were no outbursts or apologies from the guy. When Judge Price finished and said, "Mr. Naden, you have been sentenced to life imprisonment. You will not be released on parole at any time during your life sentence," you could hear a quiet yes from the gallery. One family member later said it felt like a weight finally lifting. Naden just nodded and got led away. There was no drama at all, and Judge Price made it crystal clear. Life outside of prison is not an option for you. He's been rotting in Goulburn Supermax ever since, which some say is Australia's toughest prison. As of now, he's 52 years old and still locked up for life. Letitia's family got a bit more closure though in 2020 when bone fragments from the river were finally DNA confirmed as hers, but of course the scars don't heal easily. The thing that I kept thinking about through this whole ordeal is, why did he keep running? He even said it himself when he was caught, "Thank God it's over." I mean, no one wants to go to prison, but he seemed genuinely relieved when he was caught. Court psychiatrists noted low-grade depression and a personality disorder, but nothing severe enough for an insanity defense. Again, Naden did tell them the murders were his highest achievement, which is a pretty chilling sign of disassociation and lack of remorse. In interviews after capture, he said things like, "Once you kill somebody, you can do it again. You just don't care." That mindset probably fueled the evasion. There's no guilt to drive him back and no internal brakes. He wasn't tormented by conscience, he just was existing. I guess the paranoia of being hunted like an animal for so many years while eating raw kangaroo meat and sucking turtles finally took its toll. Malcolm Naden spent 7 years out there in the bush, turning himself into a one-man horror show, eating zoo animals, ambushing cops, living like he was the king of the outback. He finally got dragged down by a dog and locked away for life. You'd think that's as dark as the Australian wilderness gets. But the outback has a way of hiding the worst things than just one guy gone feral. While Naden was running from the law, another monster was already using the same forest to hunt people who were a little bit too trusting. This next story isn't about a man surviving off kangaroos and stolen bananas. It's about a man who turned a beautiful stretch of bush into a graveyard for young travelers who just wanted a ride. His name was Ivan Milat, and what he did to these backpackers makes Naden look like a survivalist with bad manners. Imagine you're a young traveler, 20-something years old. You're backpacking around Australia with your best mate. You're hitchhiking along the Hume Highway south of Sydney because that's where everyone did it in the early 90s. A friendly-looking guy in a four-wheel drive pulls over. Big smile, he offers you a ride. He seems normal. He's pretty chatty, cool guy. He says he knows a shortcut through the forest, so you hop in. Well, that same decision and scenario ended up costing 7 people their lives. Well, 7 or more. We'll talk about that in a second. Ivan Robert Marko Milat was born in 1944 into a big Yugoslav immigrant family in Sydney. On the outside, his parents seemed like great people. They sent him and his 13 other siblings to nice Catholic schools. Ivan's dad, though, was an alcoholic with a temper, and even as a teenager, Ivan was showing some pretty troubling behavior, like attacking animals with machetes. Between 17 and 22 years old, he was in and out of correctional facilities for breaking and entering, theft, assault, and stealing cars. The dude just couldn't stop being a criminal. In 1970, at the age of 25, Milat had just gotten out of prison for theft. 5 months after being released, he bumped into 2 18-year-old girls hitchhiking at a train station. They didn't really want to hang out with him, but he had a trick up his sleeve, forced them to hang out with him with a knife. He ended up assaulting one of the young ladies until they were able to escape at a gas station. Police were pretty quick to find him though. He was arrested and charged with rape and armed robbery. While awaiting trial, he decided to do a couple more robberies with his brothers and then fake his own suicide before fleeing to New Zealand and living there for 2 years. Yeah, his brothers were great people too. Milat eventually returned to Australia after his mother suffered a heart attack. Police caught wind of him being back in town, so he was arrested again. Somehow, the kidnapping and grape trial was thrown out thanks to his family attorney. Between 1989 and 1993, Milat murdered at least 7 young backpackers. Most of them were international travelers, British, German, Australian, all in their late teens or 20s. He'd pick them up hitchhiking, drive them deep into the forest, tie them up using their own belts, which became his MO, then spend hours stabbing and shooting them. Some victims were decapitated, others were posed. The bodies were found years apart, scattered across the same remote section of forest. The first pair turned up in 1992. These were 2 British girls who had disappeared in '89. One of the girls, Joanne Walters, had been stabbed 15 times, and her friend Carolyn Clark was shot 10 times in the head. It was later determined that Milat had used the last girl for a target practice in the woods before putting them both in a shallow grave. The third and fourth victims were a young couple, both 19 years old. Their bones were found in a remote section of the Belanglo State Forest, while the other victims were also located. The male half of that 19-year-old couple, Mr. James Gibson, his skeleton was found in the fetal position and he had been stabbed 8 times. His girlfriend, Deborah Everest's skull was beat in, her jaw was broken, and she had knife marks on her forehead and back. Victim 5, 6, and 7 were found in similar fashion in the same state forest. They were all stabbed, brutally beaten, and/or shot. One of the German hitchhikers, one of the 7 victims' head was never found. By 1993, police realized they had a serial killer on their hands who was specifically targeting backpackers. A reward was put out for $500,000. Investigators were pouring every resource into trying to catch this new serial killer, but the big break came from a guy who lived to tell the tale. A British backpacker named Paul Onions called police and said, "Hey, I know that guy you're looking for." Turns out Paul was hitchhiking in 1990 when a man named Bill picked him up. Paul said things got weird fast when Bill pulled a gun and tried to tie him up. Yeah, I'd say that's not normal behavior. Paul fought back, jumped out of the moving car, and Bill chased him down while shooting at him with a revolver. You can probably guess who Bill is. Paul then managed to flag down another driver who helped him escape. Years later, when police showed Paul a photo lineup, he pointed straight at Ivan Milat and said, "That's the man who tried to kill me." That one survivor's memory cracked the case wide open. In 1994, they raided Milat's house and found a mountain of evidence. They found guns, knives, camping gear belonging to the victims, and even clothing taken as trophies. Police ended up raiding the homes of 5 of his brothers and even his mother, where they found 24 more guns and several more items belonging to the victims. The trial in 1996 was massive. Ivan sat there in court looking bored, like it was all a big misunderstanding. The jury didn't buy it. He was convicted on 7 counts of murder and sentenced to 7 life sentences with no possibility of parole. We've got Ivan Milat locked up for 7 murders, which are the ones the courts could prove. That's 7 young backpackers buried in shallow graves in the Belanglo State Forest. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. Even after the trial, even after the evidence piled up, investigators kept digging. 7 just felt too clean, too small. They felt that the pattern was bigger, older, and uglier than what made it to court. See, Milat wasn't some late bloomer killer who suddenly snapped in '89. He had a rap sheet going back to his teens: break-ins, car theft, armed robbery, assaults. By the time he was in his 20s, he was already forcing hitchhikers off the road at knife point. Police knew he spent over 25 years as a road laborer driving highways for work. He practically lived on long stretches of empty road with plenty of hitchhikers. So when they started digging into unsolved cases, the list grew fast. Task Force Air, the team that finally nailed him in '94, reviewed 58 unsolved murders and disappearances across New South Wales and beyond. These cases from the 1970s right up through the 90s fit his MO like a glove. They were young people, often hitchhiking, vanishing along major routes, bodies dumped in remote forests or plantations. Not all of them were backpackers, some were locals, some were just kids in the wrong place. But the signature was still there. Stab wounds, shooting, sometimes decapitation, and bodies left in shallow graves are not found at all. Some investigators put the suspected total as high as 20, maybe 30 more. A few have gone even further, claiming Milat could be linked to 60 to 80 unsolved cases over his adult life. That's based on the sheer number of hitchhiker disappearances in NSW during those decades, Milat's mobility, his history of violence, and the fact he never confessed to anything. In 2025, NSW politician Jeremy Buckingham even pushed for a parliamentary inquiry into cold cases from 65 to 2010, specifically calling out Milat as a possible suspect in some of them, including the 1965 Wanda Beach murders of 2 teenage girls. In that case, the sketch of the suspect looked enough like him that people still talk about it. The brutal truth is, though, we'll probably never know the real number. Milat died denying everything. There were no deathbed confessions and no hidden map to more graves. The forest is big, the highways are long, and time erases evidence. Milat spent the rest of his life behind bars claiming he was innocent, even writing letters and giving interviews saying his family set him up. He died of cancer in prison in 2019 at the age of 74, still insisting that he didn't do it. Some people still believe him, but most of Australia knows better. The Belongo Forest is gorgeous, tall trees, hiking trails, the kind of place you'd take a photo for Instagram, but for 7 young travelers it became a death trap. Milat didn't need to chase them, he just offered a ride. He weaponized that casual trust we all have when we're young and far from home. The backpacker murders changed how people hitchhike in Australia and changed how police investigate missing persons. So we've got turtle sucker Malcolm Naden rotting away in Supermax for life and the backpack killer rotting in the ground, so let's move on to something else. Since we're still talking about Australia, we can't skip the one that launched 1,000 memes. You ever heard, "A dingo ate my baby"? That punchline was used in classics like Seinfeld, The Simpsons, and even Family Guy. The joke didn't come out of thin air one day, though. It's from a real case. It's from the tragic case of a 9-week-old girl taken from her tent in Uluru National Park, a mother screaming the truth to everyone, and a system that refused to believe her for decades. Lindy and Michael Chamberlain were by all means your average middle-class Australian family. Michael is a preacher for the Seventh-day Adventist Church and his wife is a stay-at-home mom. On August 17, 1980, the two set out to have a nice little family camping trip with their kids, something they've done more than a few times. They've taken 6-year-old Aiden and 4-year-old Reagan out to rough it in the bush before, but this time they have a new addition to the family fun. 9-week-old Azaria Chamberlain. They're camping near a massive sandstone rock formation named Uluru that is smack dab right in the middle of Australia. This rock formation is 1,100 feet tall and around 5 or 6 miles around, a perfect place for all sorts of wildlife to hang out. On that warm August night at around 8 p.m., the Chamberlain family is settling in to enjoy the great outdoors with each other. Lindy hears baby Azaria let out a cry from the tent. She's probably just hungry, Lindy thought. I mean, after all, Azaria is just 2 months old. Lindy walks over to the tent and sees a dingo slinking out of it and running away. She peeks into the tent and finds a horrific sight. The baby is gone, there's blood on the ground, and dingo tracks are leading away from the camp. Lindy screams the iconic, "A dingo's got my baby!" Wasn't that in Austin Powers too? Anyways, witnesses hear it and everyone in the nearby area starts searching. Hours go by with Azaria not being found. Real quick, if you've never seen a dingo, just think of it like an Australian coyote, just a little bit cuter. It's basically a medium-sized wild dog that hunts small prey, like rabbits or babies. Even more people, including police and rescue, join in for several days after the initial incident. Volunteers did note that the campsite area was heavily trafficked by dingoes. 7 days into the search, someone found a baby's bloodstained jumpsuit, singlet, booties, and nappy, all confirmed to be Azaria's. Still no body though. Soon after, 4 police investigators sat at a nearby motel having a couple beers while discussing the whole thing. One investigator named Michael Gilroy told his colleagues, "Yeah, it seems very likely that mom's telling the truth given that there's been a series of recent dingo attacks on children at the same park." Investigator John Lincoln, on the other hand, quote, scoffs at the possibility that a dog could lug a 10-pound baby hundreds of yards. To prove his point, he fills a bucket with 10 pounds of sand and shows the other detectives that he can only hold it in his mouth for 1 minute. He then challenged the other investigators to see if they could do it better. I honestly didn't make that part up. I wish I did. For one, Detective Lincoln, I wish you guys had Google back then because a dingo can easily carry 20 pounds or more over distances. And 2, you're not a fucking dingo. Anyways, the first coroner inquest was opened December of 1980. An inquest is just a simple investigation to figure out who, when, and how someone died. By now, this whole case had exploded in popularity. It was all over magazines, newspapers, and even television. In February of 1981, the court proceedings of the coroner's findings was televised. Coroner said, yep, it was most likely a dingo attack, but he added something kind of odd to his ending statement. He stated Azaria's body had been taken from the possession of the dingo and disposed of by an unknown method by a person or person's name unknown. Personally, I have no idea how the hell he came to that conclusion, but that's what it says in the reports. The police aren't very happy with the results of the coroner's findings, so they continue the investigation. The public wasn't very happy either. People watching the broadcast said Lindy seemed too calm. Rumors started that because of her religious background, the baby might have been used as a human sacrifice. Like blood for the blood gods. Some rumors stated that the Chamberlains were somehow linked to the Jonestown mass sewer slide 2 years earlier. That was the one where Jim Jones convinced hundreds of people to move to Guyana, South America, and a U.S. congressman went to investigate, so they shot him. Then they all took poison, killing 900 people, including 300 children. And back to the dingo. 3.5 months after the first coroner's results, one of the world's leading forensics teams at the London Hospital Medical College took a look at the baby clothes that were found during the search. After some thorough research, including ultraviolet photography, the investigation took quite a turn. Forensic professionals said the baby's throat was cut and the imprint of a small adult hand was found on the jumpsuit. The family's car was then seized and combed through by forensics. Authorities said they found traces of human fetal hemoglobin on some areas. A pair of scissors were also found, which were said to have been used to cut the baby's throat. Michael and Lindy Chamberlain were arrested for the murder of Azaria. The prosecution had a heck of a story. According to them, Lindy had taken the baby to the family car, slit her throat with a pair of scissors in the front seat, and then hid the body in a large camera case. They said she then fed her son a can of baked beans by the campfire before going to the tent and yelling, "A dingo ate my baby." Then, while everyone was searching for the poor baby, Lindy disposed of the body. There were a couple of witnesses who took the stand during the trial, one being a fellow tourist of the same camp. Miss Sally Lowe said Lindy walked away from the barbecue for 6 to 10 minutes before returning. She also stated that she heard a quite serious cry from the baby shortly before Lindy went back to the tent. Miss Lowe then went on to state that earlier she had been forced to shoo off a dingo that had grabbed her 12-year-old daughter by the arm and pulled. Yes, the witness saw a dingo attack her 12-year-old. Another witness they brought to the stand was a hitchhiker the Chamberlains had picked up in '79. Turns out he was injured and had bled inside of their car. Crazy. 24 witnesses and a dozen forensic experts took to the stand and testified. Some were defending Lindy, and some were pointing in the direction of Lindy cutting her newborn's throat in cold blood and hiding the body. On October 29th at 8:37 p.m., the foreman of the Chamberlain jury announced the verdict. The jury found Lindy guilty of murder and Michael guilty of being an accessory after the fact. The judge gave Lindy life in prison and suspended Michael's sentence. Lindy went to Berrima prison where she gave birth to Michael's 4th child a month into her sentence. Yeah, this couple must hate babies. By this time, the Free Lindy movement had started. There were still thousands of people out there that believed a dingo had actually eaten her baby. About a year into prison, new reports came out that the blood found in the family car was actually paint emulsion. Despite the new findings, a poll was released around the time saying 52% of Australians still believed that she had slimed the baby. Fast forward 3 years to 1986, an English hiker named David Brett was screwing around on Uluru, that massive sandstone monolith that the Chamberlains were camping near a couple years prior. David fell off of Uluru and unfortunately died from the fall. A week later, his body was found and police started scouring the nearby dingo dens for hiker David bones that dingoes might have carried off. What do you think the police found? The missing white jacket belonging to the little baby Azaria. Lindy was immediately released from prison in 1992, and her family was awarded $1.3 million in compensation for wrongful imprisonment. Story isn't over yet, though. 32 years after that terrible night at Uluru, the story of Azaria Chamberlain still hadn't found peace. Lindy had been convicted, imprisoned, released, and exonerated in '88 when the jacket finally turned up near a dingo lair. The convictions were quashed, she walked free, and the family tried to rebuild, but the official death certificate still listed the cause as undetermined. For decades, the Chamberlains lived with that lingering shadow, a document that refused to say what everyone who followed the case closely now believed: a dingo took her baby. In late 2011, the Northern Territory coroner decided it was time to finish what had been started so long ago. Coroner Elizabeth Morris announced a fourth inquest. This wasn't about reopening old wounds for the drama, it was about giving Azaria the dignity of a truthful record and letting her family finally close the chapter. The hearings opened in February 2012 in Darwin, and for the first time in decades, the focus shifted back to the evidence without the media circus that had poisoned everything in the 1980s. Morris listened to everything again: the original dingo tracks, the blood in the tent, the clothing found near the boulders. She reviewed decades of new information about dingoes, like how they behave, how they hunt, how when they live near tourist areas they lose their fear of people. She looked at fatal attacks that had happened since 1980, including the 2001 death of 9-year-old Clinton Gage on Kagara, Fraser Island, where dingoes mauled and killed a child in front of his family. That case alone showed what skeptics in 1980 had dismissed: that dingoes were capable of taking and carrying away a small baby. Which, of course, dude tried to disprove by putting a bucket of sand in his mouth. I guess they were short on detectives at that department or something. They asked the guy who's making grilled cheese at night to handle that case. Anyways, no new witnesses were needed to relitigate the murder theory. The old forensic claims, like the fetal hemoglobin in the car, the scissors, the supposed arterial spray, had already been dismantled years earlier. The Royal Commission in the late 1980s had exposed how much of that evidence was unreliable or misinterpreted. What mattered now was whether the remaining facts pointed clearly to one conclusion. On June 12, 2012, Coroner Morris delivered her findings in a calm 13-page ruling. She stated that the evidence was sufficient and clear and exact enough to exclude every other reasonable possibility. Azaria Chantel Lauren Chamberlain had died at Uluru on August 17, 1980. The cause of death was being attacked and taken by a dingo. She even noted that shortly after Lindy placed the baby in the tent that night, a dingo or dingoes entered, took Azaria, and carried or dragged her away. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 32 years. The death certificate was finally amended. The official record now matched what Lindy had said from the very first moment: a dingo had taken her baby. Lindy had spent years in prison, given birth behind bars, faced death threats, and watched her name become a punchline. Michael stood by her through all of it, though. Their surviving children grew up under the shadow of headlines that painted their parents as monsters. The 2012 inquest didn't erase any of that pain, but it did give Azaria's memory the dignity that it deserved. And that's the story of A Dingo Ate My Baby. Hey, they actually made a movie about it starring Meryl Streep called A Cry in the Dark. Lindy Chamberlain even wrote a book about her ordeal called Through My Eyes. All right, we've had our turtle-sucking fugitive and the dingo that really did take a baby, but Australia's outback has one more animal crime story that's too weird to skip. This one's from 1935 and still unsolved. Let's imagine you're a fisherman off the coast of Sydney. It's a beautiful freaking day. You're just vibing and suddenly one of your poles nearly snapped from something huge getting hooked. Now you're fighting for your life to reel in whatever it is. After a couple of minutes of absolute battle, you finally see it. A giant tiger shark. Hell yeah. This tiger shark is such a fine specimen you take it to the Coogee Aquarium so they can put it on display for everyone to see. A week later, on April 25th, 1935, the shark starts thrashing around in its tank like it's got a tummy ache or something. People at the aquarium watch it vomit up a rat, some other junk, and then a human arm. Wait a minute, how'd that get there? It's a man's left arm, tattooed with two boxers fighting, still wearing a rope around the wrist like it was tied to something. The aquarium staff understandably freaks out and calls the police. Or at least I think they called. This was 1935, so they probably stuck a handwritten note into the pouch of a delivery kangaroo, as was common practice. The arm is pulled from the tank and suddenly Sydney's got a murder mystery on its hands. Detectives figure the shark must have eaten the rest of the body somewhere out in the ocean. But how did a whole person end up as shark food? They plastered the tattoo across every newspaper in the country, and within hours, a woman named Ethel Williams recognizes it. She says it belongs to her husband, James Jimmy Smith, a 40-year-old ex-boxer and small-time crook who'd gone missing 2 weeks earlier. Jimmy had been arguing with a man named Patrick Brady, a known forger and ex-sailor. Police haul Brady in and he claims innocence. He says Jimmy owed him money and then vanished. But they also find bloodstains in Brady's boat shed, a missing rope that matches the one on the arm, and witnesses who saw Brady and Jimmy together the night he disappeared. Wild. That's what we call substantial evidence. Just like dingoes eating babies, the case explodes. Headlines scream, "Shark arm murder." That's the name of my next metal band. The public is obsessed, but here's where it falls apart. The arm is the only body part ever discovered. No torso, no legs, no head, no murder weapons, and no confession. Forensic science in 1935 wasn't what it is today. They didn't have that fancy DNA testing stuff or a national fingerprint database. The arm had been in shark stomach acid for who knows how long, so evidence was limited. Police said screw it and charged Brady with murder anyway, but at his hearing, the magistrate throws it out. Magistrate says there's not enough to go to trial, no body, and no proof that Jimmy was even dead. That's 1935 logic, I guess. The defense argued the arm could have come from a suicide or even an accident, and they let Brady walk free. With Brady not a suspect anymore, the case just goes cold. Jimmy Smith's arm is still the only piece of him ever found. Theories float around like a gang hit over money or revenge from his criminal past, or even insurance fraud gone wrong. Some say the shark swallowed the arm after Jimmy was dumped at sea. Others think he was chopped up in Brady's shed and fed to the shark to dispose of evidence. But we'll never know. Man, doing all this Australian talk made me want to watch Quigley Down Under. It's a great classic Western movie where Professor Snape hires a cowboy sniper to kill Dingo, but the dingo turn out to be people. And then Professor Snape gets really mad at Tom Selleck. Hey, thanks for hanging out on episode 3 of Crime is Fun. If you laughed instead of cried, hit that subscribe button, leave a review, tell a friend, and follow me on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast streaming services. Don't out.